January 17, 1945, the Ardennes forest lies beneath a brittle frost. A muted silence blankets the pines, broken only by the distant thrum of artillery echoing through the valleys. Snow crunches underfoot, muffled by layers of frost-hardened leaves. A lone figure moves cautiously between trees, breath rising in white plumes, rifle clutched tightly. Every shadow seems alive, every rustle a potential threat. Above, the sky is a pale gray, low and heavy, pressing down on the forest like a warning. Across the frozen landscape, German patrols sweep the area, unaware of the small band of Allied operatives moving in secret. Their mission, a strike so sensitive it exists only in the minds of a few generals, a mission never meant to appear on any official war record. Time stretches, measured in the heartbeat of men trained to vanish into the cold. Each step carries the weight of lives, the burden of strategy, and the silent acknowledgment that failure would mean more than death. It would mean being erased, leaving only whispers in the margins of history. The forest holds its breath, and then the operation begins. By early 1945, the European war had entered a desperate, chaotic phase. The Allies had liberated much of France and Belgium, pressing relentlessly toward Germany's western borders. Yet in the Ardennes, winter offered a reprieve for German forces. Snowbound forests and frozen rivers created natural defenses that slowed the advancing Allied armies. The front lines were a patchwork of vigilance and exhaustion, where every ridge and hollow could conceal a sniper, a machine gun nest, or the remnants of a panicked retreating unit. The German High Command had long relied on these natural barriers and the skill of their troops to buy time. But the Allies, learning from months of attrition, had honed new strategies: rapid mechanized assaults, combined arms coordination, and air reconnaissance that probed enemy lines with almost surgical precision. Behind this apparent momentum, intelligence officers worked tirelessly. Maps were drawn and redrawn, coded radio transmissions intercepted, and resistance networks in occupied territories pressed into service. Every movement was a calculation, every maneuver a gamble. Amid this turmoil, the Ardennes had become a crucible of secrecy. Allied commanders understood that conventional offensives carried enormous risks in this dense terrain. Patrolling units were vulnerable, convoys could be ambushed. Even a single misstep could compromise the larger campaign. And so, clandestine operations were conceived not large-scale battles, but precise, surgical missions. These missions were designed to disrupt supply lines, mislead enemy command, or gather intelligence that could not be obtained through conventional reconnaissance. One such mission was planned in near total secrecy. It involved a handful of operatives chosen not for rank but for skill, silent movement, fluent German, knowledge of the terrain, and the psychological fortitude to act under conditions that would break most soldiers. High above, Allied command debated strategy in hushed rooms, weighing risks against potential gain. Field commanders were aware only of fragments: a name, a date, a corridor of forest to monitor. The mission existed in shadow, its existence intentionally compartmentalized to ensure plausible deniability. The political and military stakes were immense. The Battle of the Bulge had raged barely a month before, leaving scars in villages and forests alike. Supply lines were stretched thin, troops were exhausted, and morale, though bolstered by recent victories, remained fragile. Any misstep in this frozen forest could cost lives and compromise broader operational goals. The Allies needed actionable intelligence that could not wait for conventional reconnaissance. In this context, covert operations were not just advantageous, they were essential. German forces, meanwhile, were no strangers to the threat of infiltration. Their intelligence networks were alert, patrols frequent, and checkpoints rigidly enforced. Yet the vastness of the Ardennes and the unpredictability of winter storms created openings, tiny fissures in which a skilled operative might slip. Resistance networks in Belgium and Luxembourg had learned to exploit these openings, smuggling messages, supplies, and men with astonishing efficiency. The collaboration of local civilians and Allied planners created a web of possibility, a faint but crucial thread that could support operations invisible to the enemy. This was the stage for what would become an erased mission. Not widely documented, not celebrated in dispatches or memoirs, It was a mission designed to exist on paper only in encrypted notes and secret files. Its objectives were clear, yet the cost of failure was incalculable. Every decision, from the route through snow-laden forests to the timing of movement across frozen roads, was calculated with precision. And yet, for all the planning, the forest itself remained unpredictable. Snow could conceal or betray. Wind could carry voices. Frost could crack, revealing footsteps to enemy patrols. Nature, as much as human calculation, would test the mission at every turn. Here, in the cold heart of Europe's final winter, the war's greater narrative narrowed to a single, fragile operation. It was a microcosm of the larger conflict. Tension between chaos and order, between secrecy and exposure, between human ingenuity and the harsh reality of war. And as the operatives moved silently through the frost, they carried not just orders but the unspoken weight of history, the knowledge that this mission might be erased. Never remembered, yet capable of altering the course of events in subtle, critical ways. The operation itself was conceived in a quiet office far from the frozen Ardennes. In the command center of the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, maps lined the walls, marked with pins and annotations that only a few eyes were permitted to see. On these maps, the forests and villages of Belgium and Luxembourg were more than geography, they were chess squares, each with its own risks and opportunities. Commanders debated routes, timing, and contingencies in hushed tones, acutely aware that even a single compromise could cost lives and imperil broader strategic objectives. The mission's goal was precise: infiltrate a key German communications hub hidden within the forested hills near Bastogne, gather intelligence on troop movements and supply routes, and if possible, sabotage select infrastructure to delay reinforcements. The information it could provide was invaluable, potentially allowing Allied forces to anticipate German counterattacks during the final push into the Reich. It was not a mission for large battalions. Stealth and discretion were paramount. A handful of operatives, moving under cover of darkness and winter storms, would carry the weight of entire divisions on their shoulders. The planning drew on the combined expertise of intelligence officers, engineers, and local resistance networks. Radios and codebooks were supplied, yet operatives were trained to operate independently of technology whenever necessary. Maps were topographical, meticulously annotated with patrol patterns and supply caches, but commanders knew that the human element, German discipline, vigilance, and adaptability, would always introduce uncertainty. Each operative memorized multiple routes and escape plans. Each had a role, a set of contingencies, and an understanding that failure was not merely a personal risk, it was a potential breach of the war itself. German forces in the region, though battered and increasingly desperate, remained formidable. The Ardennes had become a layered defense: observation posts, patrol routes, minefields, and concealed bunkers. Their troops were familiar with the terrain, the villages, and the local populations. Even in winter, their discipline allowed for rapid response to unexpected movements. Any misstep by the operatives would not only endanger them, but also alert the enemy to broader strategic intentions. It was a test of nerve, skill, and the meticulous coordination of small units operating in isolation. Civilian involvement added another layer of complexity. Locals sympathetic to the Allied cause provided shelter, intelligence, and sometimes physical guidance through forests, roads, and hidden paths. Yet every interaction carried risk. A single betrayed secret could unravel the operation entirely. The operatives relied on intuition honed through months of training, but the human factor, fear, hesitation, misjudgment, remained unpredictable. This interplay between skill and circumstance underscored the mission's extreme fragility. Winter, with its short days and long nights, was both an advantage and a hazard. Snow muffled footsteps but left tracks visible to alert eyes. Fog and low-hanging clouds concealed movement but made navigation treacherous. Rivers and streams froze unevenly. The operatives had to move quickly yet cautiously, always balancing speed against silence, always calculating the cost of exposure. Ultimately, this mission existed in a paradoxical space, meticulously planned yet reliant on improvisation. Its success or failure would be measured only in the immediate impact on operations and in the whispers of those few who carried it out. As dawn approached over the Ardennes, snowflakes drifted through skeletal branches, and the operatives readied themselves to cross enemy lines. The frozen forest held them in tense anticipation. The world beyond the trees continued its march of artillery, retreat, and command. In this stillness, the mission's angles, the human, tactical, technological, and leadership dimensions began to emerge, each one shaping the operation's possible outcomes and the lives caught within it. The mission rested on the shoulders of a handful of operatives, men trained not for glory but for invisibility. They were soldiers, spies, and resistance collaborators, selected for skill and temperament rather than rank. Each carried knowledge that could tip the balance in the Ardennes, yet the weight of secrecy made the mission psychologically isolating. They moved silently through snow-laden forests, feeling the crunch of frost underfoot and the constant gaze of unseen eyes. Every heartbeat was measured, every step deliberate. Fear was ever present, but it was a disciplined, fear-controlled, focused, transformed into heightened awareness. Letters home, when they existed, were censored, truncated, and carefully coded. Operatives rarely saw one another outside of operational coordination, and bonds were forged not in camaraderie but in shared vulnerability. In many ways, the human element was the most unpredictable variable. Training could prepare men for the physical demands, but nothing could entirely prepare them for the moral tension. The knowledge that a single mistake could not only cost lives but erase the mission's purpose entirely. In a forest that seemed to stretch endlessly, human endurance, courage, and judgment were tested hour by hour. Tactically, the operation was a study in minimalism and precision. Large-scale engagements were impossible without drawing immediate attention. The success of the mission depended on stealth and timing. Movement was dictated by patrol patterns, natural cover, and the unforgiving terrain. Operatives used narrow, snow-packed paths, crossing frozen streams only at points pre-verified by reconnaissance and resistance reports. Patrols were avoided rather than confronted. Engagement was a last resort. Maps were studied relentlessly, and contingencies were built into every movement. If a primary route became compromised, alternate routes had been memorized and marked with subtle, inconspicuous signs. Coordination relied on prearranged signals, such as small flares or the movement of objects left in sight lines known only to the team. Even environmental conditions where tactical variables wind direction could carry sound. Fog could conceal, and snow could both betray and protect. Each decision was a calculation, speed versus silence, risk versus reward. The tactical success of the mission depended on the ability to operate under these constraints with absolute discipline. A single misstep, a misjudged snowdrift, a snapped twig, or a moment of hesitation could alert the enemy and unravel the operation entirely. In this theater, tactics were inseparable from patience, endurance, and the psychological state of the operatives. While stealth was the operative's primary ally, technology provided subtle but critical support. Radios and field telegraphs were used sparingly to avoid detection. Their signals brief and encoded in patterns designed to evade German direction-finding equipment. The mission relied on specialized equipment, compasses, portable map cases, and devices for intercepting or jamming enemy communications. Even mundane items, a small mirror, a flashlight with a red lens, or a foldable shovel became tools of survival, navigation, and concealment. Intelligence gathering itself relied heavily on technological improvisation. Maps carried annotations invisible to casual observation. Microfilm, carried in hollowed objects or sewn into clothing, preserved critical documents. These tools allowed operatives to extract high-value intelligence without leaving traces detectable by the enemy. Yet technology was always secondary to human skill. A radio might fail, a compass might freeze, and snow could obscure markings. In these moments, training and instinct determined the difference between success and failure. The intersection of human judgment, tactical ingenuity, and technological support formed the backbone of the mission. Each angle reinforced the others, yet each carried its own vulnerability. In a forest that could conceal entire battalions, even the smallest misalignment a hesitated step. A misread signal, a frozen device could have consequences far beyond the immediate moment. The operatives were not merely soldiers. They were nodes in a network, each action resonating outward into the larger war effort. The forest, silent and unyielding, watched them. Human courage, tactical precision, and technological ingenuity were in constant negotiation with the cold, the snow, and the alert eyes of the enemy. In this tension, the true stakes of the operation revealed themselves not in broad strategic charts or battle maps, but in the simple, intimate struggle to move unseen, survive, and accomplish what history might never record, exacting as the operatives themselves. Orders were issued in fragments, compartmentalized so that no single officer or soldier could fully reconstruct the mission's scope. The planners knew the stakes. One misstep in the Ardennes could compromise months of strategic advances, yet withholding information was necessary to protect both the operation and those carrying it out. Command decisions were made in tension between urgency and patience. The war demanded speed. The forest demanded caution. Leaders had to anticipate not just the enemy's movements but the reactions of their own operatives under extreme stress. In some cases, this meant trusting intuition as much as intelligence. One misjudged timing of a patrol, one miscommunicated instruction, could transform a carefully orchestrated maneuver into catastrophe. The moral weight rested squarely on the shoulders of those who never left their offices, yet every choice rippled through the snow. Into the footsteps of the men moving silently below, the leadership's role extended beyond strategy. It involved managing secrecy, ensuring that failures or even successes remained hidden. Reports were encrypted, communications minimized, and official records scrubbed. The mission, though critical, was deliberately erased from the visible history of the conflict. This required a type of courage often overlooked in traditional accounts of war: the willingness to act decisively while leaving no trace of the action itself. German forces in the Ardennes were alert, disciplined, and adaptive. Patrols moved along frozen paths with rigorous regularity, observation posts scanned the tree lines, and sentries watched for anomalies in snow patterns, footprints, and the occasional reflection of moonlight on metal. Intelligence officers combed through reports of resistance activity, aware that the Allies often relied on small, specialized teams to disrupt communications, sabotage infrastructure, or gather reconnaissance. Despite exhaustion and dwindling supplies, the German forces demonstrated an uncanny ability to respond to irregular threats. Minor disturbances, a snapped branch, a fleeting shadow could trigger alert signals, sending patrols into the forest and threatening to compromise covert missions. The enemy's presence was pervasive yet often invisible, a constant psychological pressure on the operatives. Awareness of this heightened vigilance shaped every decision: when to move, when to halt, when to act decisively. Every interaction with the enemy became a calculated negotiation between stealth and survival. Even as the Allies planned with meticulous care, the Germans' own improvisation introduced uncertainty. Orders could be delayed, units repositioned, or local sympathizers coerced. In this chessboard of tension, the operatives were small pieces moving through a field where every miscalculation carried weight beyond their understanding. Embedded within the mission were profound moral and ethical dilemmas. These were not overtly violent engagements in the style of conventional battles. Success often required deception, subterfuge, and acts that skirted the boundaries of what soldiers might traditionally consider honorable. Operatives had to navigate interactions with civilians, some allies, some unknowingly loyal to the enemy without endangering innocent lives while still fulfilling military objectives. The secrecy of the mission amplified these dilemmas. If an operative's action resulted in civilian casualties, it would likely remain unreported, erased alongside the mission itself. There was no public accountability, only the private burden carried by those who made life-and-death decisions in silence. Even within the team, disagreements could arise over the ethics of particular actions, cutting lines, sabotaging infrastructure, or misdirecting enemy patrols. Each choice tested the operative's judgment, training, and moral compass. The mission also posed ethical questions for leadership. To erase the operation from history, to shield its outcomes from public record, was to obscure acts of courage and sacrifice. It raised uncomfortable truths about war itself, that some victories and some sacrifices exist only in shadows. The erasure of the mission preserved operational secrecy, but demanded that the valor, fear, and human cost remain hidden from collective memory. In the tension between command decisions, enemy vigilance, and ethical boundaries, the mission assumed a complexity far beyond its modest scale. It became a study in human endurance, strategy, and conscience, a microcosm of the larger war. Each angle intertwined with the others. Leadership influenced human action. Enemy presence dictated tactics. Moral choices shaped operational methods. As the operatives prepared to enter the heart of the Ardennes, these angles, human, tactical, technological, leadership, enemy, and ethical, coalesced into the decisive moment. Every footstep, every breath, every calculation built toward the mission's climax, where planning, courage, and circumstance would collide in a single, perilous crescendo. The immediate aftermath of the mission was a tense quiet, both in the forest and in command centers far beyond the Ardennes. For the operatives, relief was tempered by exhaustion. Months of planning, hours of near-perfect execution, and the constant pressure of life-or-death improvisation had left physical and mental marks. Fingers and faces bore frostbite. Minds were a mixture of adrenaline and deep fatigue. Every step back into Allied territory was a reminder that survival was never guaranteed, and success had required both skill and fortune. In the field, local resistance networks moved quickly to erase evidence of the operatives' passage. Snow tracks were covered, abandoned supplies removed. These small acts of concealment were critical. The forest, which had been a stage for precise movements and silent confrontations, returned to its seemingly indifferent stillness. German forces, meanwhile, detected anomalies. Communications disruptions in the targeted hub raised suspicions. Patrol logs noted unusual patterns of activity. Officers speculated about the cause, perhaps sabotage, perhaps intelligence leakage, but the intruders had vanished without trace. Despite efforts to investigate, no concrete evidence was found, and the inability to trace it fueled heightened vigilance across the region. Psychologically, the mission left its mark on both sides. For the operatives, there was the quiet satisfaction of success, coupled with the gnawing awareness that their contribution would remain invisible to history. Letters home could not fully explain what had been done, and no public recognition would follow. The secrecy demanded by command created a paradoxical burden. The very accomplishment that could have been celebrated became a private. For the German soldiers, the incident sowed doubt. Even minor disruption to communications could create cascading consequences for command and logistics. Suspicion of unseen Allied operatives moving silently through forests. Invisible yet effective heightened anxiety and strained coordination. Every patrol became hypervigilant. Every shadow carried potential threat. The psychological weight of an unseen enemy. At Allied command centers, the intelligence gathered was analyzed immediately. Microfilm, maps, and intercepted communications provided insights that could anticipate German troop movements. While the broader public and even most military units would never know, the operation's contribution was tangible and actionable. Every small detail extracted from the forest had a ripple effect. A radio code decrypted, a supply depot mapped, a patrol pattern noted. The war, vast and chaotic, was altered in subtle yet significant ways. The operatives themselves were debriefed quietly, their observations recorded, their recommendations noted. Medical checks revealed frostbite and exhaustion, but also extraordinary resilience. Commanders recognized that the mission's success depended not just on planning and intelligence, but on the human ability to endure, adapt, and improvise under conditions most would consider impossible. This blend of courage, skill, and endurance highlighted the unique nature of covert operations in the European theater operations that would remain invisible to most. Even as winter continued its grip on the Ardennes, the forest silence held a secret. Among the trees, the paths of the operatives were erased, the tracks smoothed by snow and careful concealment. The German communications hub resumed near-normal operation, unaware that the very data it transmitted had been observed, documented, and partially disrupted. History, for the moment, remained unaware. Yet, in the minds of those who carried it out, and the war had been subtly, irrevocably influenced. As the weeks passed, the broader implications of the mission became clear. though few outside command would ever know. The intelligence gathered during those tense hours in the Ardennes provided Allied planners with a clearer picture of German troop dispositions, supply chains, and communication methods. This allowed field commanders to anticipate counterattacks, redistribute forces efficiently, and exploit vulnerabilities in enemy logistics. In practical terms, what had been accomplished by a handful of operatives subtly shaped the larger strategy for the final push into Germany, accelerating the collapse of enemy resistance in certain sectors, yet the mission's success was paradoxical. Its effectiveness depended entirely on invisibility. Reports were classified at the highest level, with only a select few officers aware of the full scope. Official records of the operation were deliberately scrubbed, leaving only encrypted notes and verbal accounts. This secrecy ensured that no recognition could be given, no medal awarded, no public acknowledgment offered. The mission existed as a shadow in military archives, invisible to historians for decades, and intentionally erased from the war's narrative. Its erasure was not neglect, it was strategy. To reveal such operations might compromise methods, sources, and surviving operatives still engaged in similar missions elsewhere. For the operatives, the impact was deeply personal. They returned to standard duties, blending back into conventional units, carrying knowledge and fatigue that no one outside the mission could fully understand. Some bore minor injuries, frostbite, or psychological strain from the sustained tension and risk of capture. Yet they had altered the course of larger operations in ways that would remain hidden for decades. Their deeds were recorded only in secret logs and the memories of those who shared the forested paths of the Ardennes with them. The German side also felt ripples of consequence. While the immediate tactical impact seemed minimal, the psychological effect endured. Commanders remained cautious, communications protocols tightened, and small shifts in troop deployments reflected lingering concern about unseen Allied infiltration. Even in defeat, the specter of invisible adversaries shaped operational choices, demonstrating the intangible power of stealth and intelligence in warfare. Long after the snow melted from the Ardennes, the mission's influence persisted. Intelligence gathered contributed to more effective Allied offensives, reducing unnecessary losses and accelerating advances into enemy-held territory. Small victories in intelligence often translated into large advantages on the battlefield, yet these advantages were never publicized. Strategic secrecy dictated that the world would never hear of the night when a handful of operatives moved unseen through the frost, altering the course of operations with precision, courage, and discretion. Historians would later uncover fragments of these events in declassified files, revealing the meticulous planning and daring execution that had characterized the operation. Yet even these fragments paint only a partial picture. The full human cost, the intense psychological strain, and the precise improvisations required remain largely invisible. What emerges is a story not of grand battles or celebrated generals, but of individuals whose courage and skill quietly shifted the balance of conflict while leaving no mark in conventional histories. Ultimately, the mission exemplified a truth about war. Not all victories are public, and not all sacrifices are recorded. Some operations are meant to exist in shadows, measured not in headlines or propaganda, but in the subtle, cumulative effects they produce. In this case, a winter night in the Ardennes, a frozen forest, and a handful of operatives had quietly reshaped the battlefield while history, at the time, moved on unaware. The Operation S erasure from official records highlights both the precision and the paradox of covert warfare. Its impact could be monumental, yet its memory intentionally obscured. And in this space between action and acknowledgment lies a story of courage, ingenuity, and the quiet power of those willing to operate in secrecy for the greater good. The ripples of that winter night, though invisible to most, extended far beyond the forest. They set the stage for reflection on the nature of warfare, the hidden contributions that shape outcomes, and the enduring tension between secrecy and recognition. In the quiet of history, some deeds exist only as shadows. This mission in the Ardennes, executed with precision, courage, and meticulous planning, was one such shadow. Its participants moved through snow-laden forests, navigated danger with unerring skill, and returned with intelligence that shaped the course of a campaign, yet they left no footprint in official records. The world would never see medals awarded or headlines praising their success. And yet, in that erasure lies a profound truth about the nature of warfare. Covert operations, by design, are paradoxical. Their value is measured not in recognition but in effect. A single night, a handful of operatives, and the subtle disruption of enemy communications could ripple outward to influence movements of entire armies. History often celebrates the visible, great battles, decisive generals, and sweeping campaigns. But some of the most consequential moments occur in silence. In the interstices of strategy, where human skill, endurance, and judgment collide with circumstance and chance. The Ardennes, cold and unyielding, became both stage and witness. Snow muffled footsteps, frost hardened resolve, and the forest concealed acts of courage that would never be chronicled. Leadership, ingenuity, and moral judgment converged in a delicate balanced decisions made under immense pressure, with lives and the broader war effort hanging in the balance. The operative's success was ephemeral yet eternal. It left no record, but it altered events nonetheless. Reflecting on such missions invites a meditation on history itself. Not all victories are celebrated. Not all sacrifices are remembered. Some stories exist only in whispers, in the quiet acknowledgment of those who lived them, and in the faint echoes preserved by later declassified records. They remind us that human courage is not always recognized, but its impact is often enduring. This erased mission, frozen in the Ardennes winter, teaches that the unseen, the unrecorded, and the secret can shape history as decisively as the battles written in books. In the shadows of war, where silence reigns, extraordinary human resolve quietly shifts the tide of events, leaving only the faintest trace in the collective memory of a world at war.